The scorching August sun beat down on Maxwell Harrington's sprawling vineyard estate as he stared grimly at the tabloid headlines splashed across his tablet. His 18-year-old twins, Oliver and Charlotte, had once again made the gossip columns. This, in time for crashing a yacht worth millions off the coast of Monaco. At 58, Maxwell had built Harrington Enterprises from nothing into a global tech empire worth billions. But his greatest challenge remained the entitled children who seemed determined to squander every opportunity he'd given them. The twins' summer of international escapades had become increasingly reckless, leaving Maxwell to wonder if his wealth had robbed his children of something essential, the understanding of what it truly meant to work for something meaningful. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maxwell closed the news app and gazed out over the rolling hills of his 500-acre Sonoma Valley estate. The vineyard had been his first major purchase 15 years ago after his tech company went public, a sentimental investment rather than a practical one. His late wife, Victoria, had always dreamed of owning a vineyard, though she hadn't lived to see him fulfill that promise. The Harrington Vineyard had become something of a prestigious hobby, producing award-winning wines in limited quantities. While operating largely independently from Maxwell's daily attention, the vibration of his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Sandra, his executive assistant, with news that the twins' latest legal troubles had been resolved with a substantial donation to the Monaco Maritime Conservation Fund. Maxwell sighed, thanking her before ending the call. The ease with which money solved their problems was precisely the issue. His children had never faced real consequences. As he walked the perimeter of the main house, Maxwell came to a decision. The vineyard's harvest season was approaching, and the seasonal workers would arrive next week to begin the labor-intensive process of picking and processing the grapes. This year would be different. This year, his children would learn what real work felt like. That evening, when Oliver and Charlotte arrived via helicopter from San Francisco, Maxwell was waiting for them in the grand entry hall of the main house. Oliver sauntered in first, his designer sunglasses still on, despite the indoor setting, his attention fixed on his phone. Charlotte followed, arguing with someone on her phone about delivery times for a custom dress she needed for an upcoming gala. "Good evening," Maxwell said firmly, his voice cutting through their distraction. "I'm glad you could fit a visit to your father into your busy social schedules." Charlotte ended her call abruptly, offering a practiced smile. "Daddy, we were just coming to tell you about our plans for the charity ball next month. The theme is ocean conservation, which is so relevant after what happened in Monaco. It was totally not our fault, by the way. That captain was... Your plans have changed," Maxwell interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Both of you living room now." The twins exchanged glances before following their father into the expansive living room with its panoramic views of the vineyard. Maxwell gestured for them to sit on the Italian leather sofa while he remained standing. "For the past 3 years, since you graduated high school, you've been attending college in name only while spending my money across every exclusive destination in Europe and Asia," Maxwell began, his voice controlled but intense. "The tabloids know more about your daily activities than I do. Your mother would be profoundly disappointed." The mention of their mother caused both twins to flinch. Victoria had passed away when they were 12, after a long battle with cancer. In the years since, Maxwell had buried himself in work, leaving the twins largely in the care of staff and boarding schools. "That's not fair," Oliver protested, removing his sunglasses finally. "You can't keep using Mom against us whenever you're unhappy with something we've done. What's not fair is watching my children waste their potential and my legacy on meaningless pursuits," Maxwell countered, "which is why things are changing starting tomorrow." He pulled out 2 envelopes and handed one to each twin. "What's this?" Charlotte asked, reluctantly taking the envelope. "Your new employment contracts," Maxwell explained. "For the next 8 weeks, you'll be working as harvest interns at Harrington Vineyard. Minimum wage, standard employee housing, no special privileges. You'll report to Paolo Esposito, the vineyard manager, at 5 a.m. tomorrow." The twins stared at their father in stunned silence before erupting simultaneously. "This is insane," Oliver shouted, throwing the envelope onto the coffee table. "I have commitments, events. My symposium on digital equity next week," Charlotte interjected, though both Maxwell and Oliver knew she had never attended any of the foundation events that bore her name. "All cancelled," Maxwell stated flatly. "Your credit cards have been frozen. Your trust funds are temporarily inaccessible. Your vehicles remain in San Francisco. For the next 8 weeks, you are regular employees of this vineyard, nothing more." "And if we refuse?" Oliver challenged, crossing his arms over his chest. Maxwell had anticipated this question. "Then you are both formally cut off, permanently. The choice is yours, 8 weeks of honest work or a lifetime of fending for yourselves without the Harrington name or fortune." The color drained from Charlotte's face. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Maxwell replied. "I love you both too much to watch you waste your lives. This vineyard was your mother's dream. Perhaps working the land she loved will help you connect with what matters." He checked his watch. "You have until morning to decide. Paolo expects you at the Southfield entrance at 5 a.m. Employee housing is in the east wing of the property. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." With that, Maxwell left his stunned children in the living room, hoping he wasn't making a terrible mistake. As he climbed the grand staircase to his private suite, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For years, he had tried to compensate for Victoria's absence by giving the twins everything money could buy. Perhaps what they truly needed was the opposite, to discover what they could achieve on their own. Dawn broke over the vineyard in a spectacular display of orange and pink hues as Paolo Esposito checked his watch with growing impatience. The Italian vineyard manager had come to Harrington Vineyard 5 years ago after decades of experience. In Tuscany, he had agreed to Maxwell's unusual request with significant reservations. Harvest was the most critical time of year, no place for entitled teenagers playing at being workers. To Paolo's surprise, at precisely 5 a.m., 2 figures appeared walking down the gravel path toward the meeting point. They were nearly unrecognizable from the polished socialites he occasionally glimpsed visiting the estate. Oliver wore jeans that still had creases from being newly purchased, and work boots that gleamed with never having been worn. Perfection. Charlotte had pulled her blonde hair into a practical ponytail, her face completely devoid of her usual meticulous makeup, wearing what appeared to be designer workwear that had been created to look distressed while costing more than Paolo earned in a week. "You came," Paolo said, making no effort to hide his surprise. "Your father thought you might choose the other option." "And give him the satisfaction?" Oliver scoffed. "No way. How hard can picking grapes be anyway? People have been doing it for thousands of years." Paolo suppressed a smile. "You'll find out soon enough. Follow me for orientation." The next hour was a blur of information. Proper harvesting techniques, safety protocols, quality control standards. The twins listened with increasing alarm as they realized the physical demands that awaited them. They then watched as Paolo demonstrated the proper technique for hand harvesting the delicate Pinot Noir grapes, carefully cutting the clusters and placing them in collection baskets without damaging the fruit. Each worker is expected to harvest at minimum 2 tons of grapes per day, Paolo explained, watching their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief as they tried to conceptualize the weight. The bins will be inspected regularly for quality control. Damaged fruit affects the entire batch. By 6:30 a.m., the rest of the harvest crew had arrived, about 30 seasonal workers, many of whom returned to Harrington Vineyard each year. They regarded the twins with curiosity and some amusement, as Paolo assigned everyone to their rows. Oliver and Charlotte were paired with Maria, a grandmother of 5 who had been harvesting grapes across California for over 30 years. "Stay, close and watch," Maria instructed them with practical kindness. "First day always the hardest." She wasn't exaggerating. By 9 a.m., Charlotte's designer work gloves were stained purple. Her back ached from bending and reaching, and her collection bin was embarrassingly empty compared to Maria's rapidly filling one. Oliver wasn't faring much better. His city soft hands had already developed blisters despite the gloves, and the relentless sun beating down made him dizzy with dehydration he'd never experienced before. "Water break!" Paolo called out, and the workers moved to the shade of a large oak tree, where coolers of water and light snacks awaited. Charlotte collapsed onto the ground, not caring about the dirt staining her expensive jeans. "I can't do this," she whispered to Oliver. "It's not even noon." Oliver, looking equally defeated, stared at his hands. "We don't have a choice. Dad, it's this or nothing." Maria approached, offering them each an electrolyte drink. "First day always like this," she repeated with a sympathetic smile. "Body learns, gets stronger, you'll see." "How do you do this every day?" Charlotte asked, genuine curiosity breaking through her exhaustion. Maria considered the question seriously. "My family has harvested for generations. My grandfather had a small vineyard in Michoacan before we came here. When I work with the vines, I feel connected to him, to my history. Besides," she added with a practical shrug, "my grandchildren need school supplies, and my daughter needs help with rent. We do what we must for family." The simplicity and dignity of her answer left both twins momentarily speechless. When the break ended, they returned to their rows with slightly more determination. By the end of that first excruciating day, Oliver and Charlotte had harvested less than half what was expected of a single worker. They dragged themselves to the simple 2-bedroom cottage in the eastern section of the property that would be their home for the next 8 weeks. The cottage, while clean and comfortable, was a stark departure from their usual luxury accommodations. The furniture was practical rather than fashionable, the kitchen basic, and most shocking to the twins. No staff awaited to prepare their meals or attend to their needs. "There's food in the refrigerator," Charlotte noted with surprise as she explored the kitchen. "And a note." The handwritten note was from Elaine, the estate's head housekeeper. "Basic supplies stocked, laundry facilities behind kitchen. Workers shuttle to town leaves at 7 p.m. if needed. Good luck." Oliver opened the refrigerator to find simple ingredients: eggs, vegetables, bread, milk, and some prepared meals in containers labeled with reheating instructions. It suddenly occurred to him that neither he nor Charlotte had ever cooked a meal in their lives. "I guess we're having sandwiches," he muttered, pulling out bread and some pre-sliced cheese. After their makeshift dinner, both twins fell into bed before 8 p.m., muscles screaming in protest at the day's unaccustomed labor. Neither bothered to check social media or return messages from friends wondering about their sudden disappearance from their usual scene. The next morning was, if possible, even more difficult. Every muscle ached as the 4:30 a.m. alarm blared mercilessly. Charlotte actually cried as she forced herself to stand, her body protesting movements she'd never before found difficult. "I hate him for this," she said, as they walked stiffly toward the meeting point in the pre-dawn darkness. "He just wants to punish us for embarrassing him." Oliver, who had been thinking much the same thing, found himself unexpectedly defensive of their father. Maybe, or maybe he really thinks this will help somehow. He wasn't sure why he was. defending Maxwell's decision, especially when his own hands were covered in bandages over fresh blisters. Days 2 and 3 followed much the same pattern: grueling physical labor, moments of humiliation as they struggled with tasks that the other workers completed with practiced efficiency, and bone-deep exhaustion that left no energy for their usual pursuits. By day 4, something subtle began to shift. Their bodies, while still sore, began adjusting to the demands. Their harvesting technique improved under Maria's patient guidance, and they found themselves less frequently the subject of Paolo's quality control corrections. On the evening of their 5th day, too exhausted to even complain anymore, they received their first surprise. A knock at the cottage door revealed Paolo holding a bottle of wine. "From last year's harvest," he explained, stepping inside at their confused invitation. "I thought perhaps it's time you understand what all this work is for." He retrieved 3 glasses from their kitchen cabinet and opened the bottle, allowing it to breathe while explaining the winemaking process that followed the harvest. With genuine passion, he described how the specific soil of their section, of the vineyard, the microclimate, and even the direction of the slopes affected the character of the grapes they were harvesting. As he poured the ruby-red liquid into their glasses, he instructed them on how to properly evaluate the wine, the visual inspection, the smell, the taste. For the first time, the twins found themselves genuinely interested, asking questions and paying attention to the subtle notes Paolo described. "This wine," Paolo said, holding his glass up to the light, "comes from vines that your mother selected herself." Both twins froze, their glasses halfway to their lips. "What did you say?" Charlotte asked quietly. Paolo looked confused. "Your mother, Mrs. Victoria. She personally selected several of our vine blocks, including the ones you've been harvesting. She had an exceptional understanding of viticulture for someone who came to it later in life. She studied considerably before choosing which clones to plant in which locations." Oliver and Charlotte exchanged bewildered glances. They had been told their mother had wanted the vineyard as a status symbol, a beautiful retreat. They had never heard she had actual knowledge or passion for winemaking itself. "Our father never mentioned that," Oliver said carefully. Paolo seemed surprised. "She was very involved in the early development of this vineyard. The original plantings, the orientation of the rows, the varietals selected, all her decisions. Your father continued her vision after she passed, but the heart of this place, its foundation, that was her creation." After Paolo left, the twins sat in silence for a long time, the revelation about their mother casting the vineyard and their forced labor in an entirely new light. "Why wouldn't Dad tell us any of this?" Charlotte wondered aloud. "All these years, I thought this place was just another one of his trophy acquisitions." Oliver shook his head, equally confused. "Maybe it hurts him too much to talk about it. You know how he shut down after she died." The next morning, both twins viewed their work with slightly different eyes. The vines they carefully harvested were no longer just plants, but connections to a mother they had lost too young. They found themselves asking Maria and the other long-time workers questions about the early days of the vineyard, hungry for any scraps of information about Victoria's involvement. By the end of their 2nd week, the twins had settled into the rhythm of harvest. Their bins were filling faster, their technique improving daily. Their hands had developed calluses, their bodies had adapted to the early mornings and physical demands. They collapsed into bed each night with the deep, satisfied exhaustion that comes from meaningful physical labor, rather than the hollow fatigue of their previous jet-setting lifestyle. Maxwell maintained his distance, watching from afar as Paolo provided regular reports on their progress. He was surprised and secretly pleased that they had chosen to stay, though he wondered if they were merely enduring until they could return to their previous lives. In the evenings, the twins began exploring the cottage and its surroundings more thoroughly. The small bookshelf held several technical volumes on viticulture and oenology, which they initially ignored. But one rainy evening, with no internet or television to distract them, Charlotte picked up a comprehensive guide to vineyard management and was surprised to find herself engrossed in the complex science behind what they'd been doing. "Listen to this," she said to Oliver, who was attempting to cook a proper meal for the first time in his life. "It says the orientation of vine rows can significantly impact sun exposure and therefore ripening patterns and flavor development. Remember how Paolo mentioned Mom specifically designed the row orientations?" Oliver, concentrating on not burning the simple pasta sauce he was preparing, grunted in acknowledgement. "There's so much we don't know about her," he said after a moment. "Dad never talks about her, and we were too young when she died to really remember the details of who she was, what she loved." During their third week, an unexpected discovery changed everything. The twins had earned enough trust from Paolo to be assigned a section of older vines at the western edge of the property, near an abandoned stone well that predated the Harrington ownership. During their lunch break, curiosity drew them to the picturesque old structure. "I bet this would get a ton of likes on Instagram," Charlotte remarked, momentarily slipping back into her old mindset as she peered down into the darkness of the well. "It's not even that deep anymore. Looks like it's been partially filled in." Oliver, leaning against the stone wall, noticed something unusual. A small metal box embedded in the mortar between the stones, nearly hidden by ivy that had grown over the well's exterior. "What's this?" he asked, carefully pulling back the vines to reveal what appeared to be a small safe or lockbox. "It looks intentionally hidden," Charlotte observed, helping him clear away more of the vegetation. The metal box had a simple combination lock, its surface weathered but still functional. "Great, so we need a combination," Oliver sighed, examining the lock more closely. "Wait, there's something engraved here." He rubbed away years of grime to reveal a small inscription. "Where it all began, VDH." "VDH, Victoria Diane Harrington," Charlotte whispered. "It's Mom's." They stared at each other, the significance of their discovery sinking in. But the combination remained a mystery. "Her birthday," Oliver suggested. They tried the date, 08-15-68, with no success. "Their anniversary?" Charlotte tried Maxwell and Victoria's wedding date, again without luck. They spent the remainder of their break attempting various significant dates without success, eventually having to return to their work. But the mystery of the box consumed their thoughts throughout the afternoon. What had their mother hidden there, and why? What did "where it all began" refer to? That evening they pored over the few mementos of their mother they had brought with them. Primarily photos on their phones. Nothing offered any clues about what the combination might be or what the cryptic phrase meant. "We need to ask Dad," Charlotte finally said. "He might know what this means." Oliver hesitated. "We haven't spoken to him in 3 weeks. He's been completely hands-off about this whole punishment arrangement." "Maybe that's the point," Charlotte mused. "Maybe he's waiting for us to make the first move." The next morning, instead of heading directly to their assigned section, the twins took a detour to the main house. They found Maxwell in his study, reviewing documents with the intensity that had built his business empire. He looked up in surprise as they entered, noting their tanned faces, calloused hands, and the newfound confidence in their postures. "This is unexpected," he said, setting aside his work. "Paolo tells me you've been exceeding expectations lately." The twins exchanged glances, momentarily thrown by the casual compliment after years of hearing primarily criticism from their father. "We found something," Oliver began without preamble, "a metal box hidden in the old well with Mom's initials on it." Maxwell's expression changed instantly, a flash of recognition followed by something deeper, regret perhaps, or long-buried grief. "You found Victoria's time capsule," he said quietly. "Time capsule," Charlotte repeated. Maxwell stood and walked to the window overlooking the vineyard. "When we purchased this property, before we planted a single vine, your mother created what she called a time capsule. She said this place represented a new chapter for our family, and she wanted to preserve the moment we began." He turned back to face them. "I had forgotten about it completely. After she passed, I couldn't bear to return to it. It needs a combination," Oliver explained. "There's an inscription where it all began, VDH. We tried her birthday, your anniversary." A sad smile touched Maxwell's lips. "It wouldn't be either of those. Where it all began refers to where our relationship began, the day we met." He wrote down a 6-digit number on a slip of paper and handed it to them. "Try this. It's the date we first met, at a technology conference where she was presenting her research on sustainable agriculture applications." The twins stared at him in confusion. "Sustainable agriculture? Mom was a researcher?" Charlotte asked incredulously. Maxwell's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Of course. Victoria had a doctorate in agricultural science with a specialization in viticulture. She was a leading researcher in sustainable vineyard practices before we met. Didn't you know that?" The twins shook their heads slowly, the foundations of their understanding shifting beneath them. They had grown up believing their mother had been simply Maxwell Harrington's wife, a beautiful, kind woman who had moved in elite social circles before her illness. "This vineyard wasn't some rich man's vanity purchase," Maxwell continued, his voice thick with emotion. "It was your mother's life work, her dream to implement the sustainable growing practices she had researched for years. When she became ill, she made me promise to maintain it, not just as a business, but as a living laboratory for her methods." The revelation left Oliver and Charlotte speechless. They had spent 3 weeks working land that represented not just their father's wealth, but their mother's intellectual legacy, and they had never known. "Go," Maxwell said, gesturing toward the door. "Open the box. It was meant for the future, and that's you now." With the combination clutched tightly in Oliver's hand, they returned to the old well. The 6-digit number worked perfectly, the Beishu lock releasing with a satisfying click after nearly 2 decades of remaining secured. Inside, they found a collection of carefully preserved items. A handwritten journal filled with Victoria's thoughts and plans for the vineyard, detailed maps with soil analysis and planting strategies, photographs of a young and vibrant Victoria standing proudly on the bare land that would become Harrington Vineyard, and most surprisingly, 2 sealed envelopes with their names written in their mother's elegant handwriting. "She left us letters," Charlotte whispered, her hands trembling as she held the envelope addressed to her. "Letters she knew we wouldn't read until we were older." They sat on the ground beside the well, opening the letters with reverent care. Victoria's words, written when the twins were just small children, spoke of her hopes for their future, her values, and her dream that the vineyard would one day be a place where they could connect with the land and with her memory. "The vines you will walk among someday are my legacy to you," she had written. "Not for their monetary value, but for what they represent. Patience, care, respect for the earth, and the understanding that the most worthwhile endeavors unfold slowly over years of devoted attention. Whether or not you choose to make wine, your life's work, I hope you'll learn these lessons from the vineyard." As they read in silence, tears streaming down their faces, Oliver and Charlotte began to understand that their forced labor wasn't a punishment, but an opportunity. Their father's desperate attempt to connect them with their mother's legacy in the only way he knew how. The journal revealed a side of Victoria Harrington they had never known, a brilliant, passionate scientist who had seen the vineyard as both a business and a mission to demonstrate that sustainable practices could produce world-class wines. The detailed notes and observations showed a mind dedicated to innovation and excellence, not the mere social butterfly they had imagined based on the few society photographs they had seen of her. "We need to show this to Dad," Oliver said finally, carefully replacing the items in the box. "I think he's been trying to fulfill a promise to Mom all these years, and we've been too self-absorbed to notice." Charlotte nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "We've been living in a bubble of privilege, completely disconnected from what really mattered to her, to both of them." That evening, they invited Maxwell to their cottage for dinner. He arrived, with visible apprehension, expecting perhaps complaints or negotiation attempts. Instead, he found the small table carefully set, a bottle of Harrington wine open to breathe, and his children waiting with newfound solemnity. On the table between them lay Victoria's journal and letters, clearly already read and discussed. Neither twin spoke as Maxwell slowly sat down, his eyes fixed on his late wife's handwriting. "You opened it," he said simply. "We had no idea," Charlotte began, her voice soft with regret. "About Mom, about what this place really meant, about any of it." "Why didn't you tell us?" Oliver asked, the question containing no accusation, only genuine curiosity. "All these years, we thought the vineyard was just another business acquisition." Maxwell was quiet for a long moment, gathering thoughts he had suppressed for years. "After your mother died, it was too painful to talk about her dreams, her work. I focused on what I could control, building the business, providing financial security. I convinced myself that was what she would have wanted." He looked up at his children with weary eyes. "I failed you both by not sharing who she really was, what she valued." "And we failed her memory," Charlotte acknowledged, "living exactly the kind of shallow, privileged lives she would have despised." "Not entirely your fault," Maxwell admitted. "I gave you everything except what you really needed, a connection to her values, her passion." The dinner that followed was unlike any the Harrington family had shared in years. They talked openly about Victoria, about the early days of the vineyard, about the sustainable practices she had pioneered that were now standard across the estate. Maxwell shared stories they had never heard, painting a picture of a brilliant, determined woman who had changed his perspective on what truly mattered in life. As the evening drew to a close, Oliver raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he said simply, "and to the work we still have to do." The words held meaning beyond the immediate moment, and Maxwell recognized it with a nod of understanding. The Sam twins would complete their harvest commitment, not because they were forced to, but because they now understood what the vineyard represented, their mother's legacy, and their own potential to contribute to something meaningful. The remaining weeks of harvest took on new significance. The twins continued their labor with renewed purpose, but they also began spending time with Maxwell in the evenings, learning about the business side of the vineyard and discussing Victoria's original vision as documented in her journal. They asked questions about sustainable practices, profit margins, distribution channels, showing genuine interest that surprised and heartened their father. On their final day of harvest, Paolo gathered the entire crew for a traditional end-of-season celebration. To the twins' surprise, he asked them to speak. Standing before the workers who had taught them so much, Oliver and Charlotte found themselves without their usual glib charm or practiced public speaking skills. Instead, they spoke honestly about their journey from entitled heirs to people, beginning to understand the true value of work and purpose. "We came here thinking this was a punishment," Charlotte admitted to the group. "We're leaving understanding it was actually a gift, connecting us to our mother's legacy and teaching. That's what real work looks like." "And we're not done learning," Oliver added, looking toward where Maxwell stood at the edge of the gathering. "This is just the beginning." As the formal harvest period ended and the twins prepared to return to their regular lives, they met with Maxwell in his study for a serious conversation. Rather than asking for their credit cards and trust funds to be reinstated, they presented him with a proposal, a year-long internship program where they would rotate through every aspect of Harrington Enterprises, starting with continuing their work at the vineyard through the winemaking process. "We want to earn our place," Charlotte explained, her tone more mature than Maxwell had ever heard from her. "Not just as your heirs, but as people who understand the businesses from the ground up. And we want to establish a scholarship program," Oliver added, "for the children of seasonal workers like Maria." Mom's journal talked about educational equity as part of sustainable business practices. Maxwell studied his children with new eyes, seeing not the entitled socialites who had left for harvest. Season 2 months earlier, but young adults beginning to discover their own potential and purpose. The transformation wasn't complete. They would face challenges and setbacks in maintaining their new perspective, but the foundation had been laid. "Your mother would be proud," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than any elaborate praise could have. As the twins left his study, Maxwell remained at his desk, looking out over the vineyard that had unexpectedly become the means of connecting his children to their mother's values. Victoria had always insisted that working the land taught lessons that couldn't be learned any other way. As usual, she'd been right. In the soft light of dusk, the old well stood as a sentinel over the vineyard, its secret now revealed, its purpose fulfilled. The hidden box had contained more than mementos and letters. It had held the truth of a family's legacy, waiting patiently to be discovered when the time was right. The discovery of Victoria's time capsule transformed the twins' perspective on their forced labor at Harrington Vineyard. As September gave way to October, the harvest concluded, but Oliver and Charlotte requested to stay on for the next phase, the complex process of turning grapes into wine. Maxwell, though surprised by their continued interest, arranged for them to work under Elena Vasquez, the head winemaker who had been with the vineyard since its founding. "Your mother hired me personally," Eleanor told them on their first day in the winery, her experienced hands testing grape samples for sugar content and acidity. "I was fresh out of UC Davis with a master's in enology, but no prestigious winery would take a chance on a young Latina woman as head winemaker. Victoria didn't care about my background, only my knowledge and passion." The twins exchanged glances, absorbing yet another perspective on the mother they were posthumously getting. To know, Victoria Harrington's time capsule had unleashed a flood of curiosity that couldn't be contained. "What was she like to work with?" Charlotte asked, carefully recording data from the refractometer as Eleanor had shown her. Eleanor smiled, her eyes distant with memory, brilliant, demanding, but never in a cruel way. She expected excellence because she gave it herself, and she was fearless about challenging convention. Much of what makes Harrington wines special came from her willingness to try approaches that traditional winemakers dismissed. The winemaking process revealed itself as a perfect balance of science and artistry. Oliver, who had barely passed high school chemistry through expensive tutoring, found himself fascinated by the biochemical transformations taking place in the fermentation tanks. Charlotte, always creative but never disciplined, discovered the satisfaction of following exacting processes where precision determined quality. Their days developed a new rhythm, rising early but not quite as brutally as during harvest, spending mornings in the laboratory running analyses, afternoons monitoring fermentation and beginning the blending trials, evenings reading Victoria's journal and discussing findings with Maxwell over dinner. Their designer clothes remained untouched in suitcases as they adopted the practical uniform of jeans and work shirts, their manicured nails now permanently stained with grape juice and laboratory chemicals. "I never thought I'd say this, Oliver," remarked one evening as they walked back to their cottage, the autumn air crisp with the scent of fermenting grapes. "But I actually look forward to waking up every morning. There's something satisfying about being part of this process from beginning to end." Charlotte nodded, understanding perfectly. "It's like we're creating something real, not just spending or consuming or posting about experiences, but making something that wouldn't exist without our contribution." The conversation drifted to their former lives, the endless cycle of exclusive parties, designer shopping, and carefully curated social media posts that had consumed their existence. It had been over a month since either of them had posted anything online, their absence from the socialite scene causing speculation among their followers. Surprisingly, neither twin felt the pull to return to that world. 2 weeks into winemaking, Paolo invited the twins to join a small gathering of vineyard veterans for dinner at his home on the property. The simple meal prepared by his wife Rosa featured ingredients from their garden and wines from previous Harrington vintages. The conversation flowed in a mixture of English and Spanish, with the longtime workers sharing stories of the vineyard's evolution. "Your mother insisted on this parcelle for the Chardonnay," old Miguel explained, gesturing toward the eastern slopes. "The other consultant said it was too exposed, but she said, 'The struggle will make stronger vines.' She was right. Those vines produce our best white wine now." She also insisted we preserve the old stone cottage and well rather than demolishing them when we expanded the north block, Rosa added, passing a plate of homemade empanadas. "She said we must respect what came before us on this land." Oliver leaned forward, suddenly alert. "The well, do you know anything about its history? Why it was significant enough to preserve?" The workers exchanged glances before Miguel spoke again. "The story goes that the original homesteaders who settled this valley dug that well in the 1880s. The water they found there allowed them to establish the first vineyard in this area. When Prohibition came, the vineyard was abandoned, but the well remained." "Victoria was fascinated by that connection," Paolo explained. "She told me once that she liked knowing the well that had nourished the first vines here would watch over her new plantings too. She called it the heart of the vineyard." "The heart of the vineyard," Charlotte repeated softly, remembering a phrase from her mother's journal that had puzzled them. "The true legacy lies at the heart, waiting to be discovered by those who understand the value of roots." After dinner, the twins walked back to their cottage under a canopy of stars, discussing this new information. "There's something more," Oliver insisted. "The box we found can't be the only thing she left there." The next morning, they returned to the well before their shift began. In daylight, they studied the structure more carefully, noting details they had missed in their excitement over finding the metal box. The well was approximately 4 feet in diameter, its walls made of carefully fitted fieldstone. Though no longer used for water, it had been meticulously preserved, with the original hand-cranked winch still mounted above it. "Look at this," Charlotte said, pointing to where several stones formed a pattern different from the rest, slightly lighter in color and more precisely cut. "These stones don't match the others. They were added later." Oliver ran his hand over the section she indicated, feeling a slight difference in the mortar. "You're right. This section was rebuilt or modified." He pressed against different stones, checking for movement. When he pushed against one particular stone with a small marking etched into its corner, he felt it shift slightly. "There's something here." Working together, they carefully wiggled the stone free, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside lay another box, smaller than the first but made of the same material, with another combination lock. Another time capsule. Charlotte wondered, carefully extracting it. The box bore a different inscription. "For those who value the roots, VDH." The same initials, but a different message. "Let's try the same combination," Oliver suggested. The lock clicked open on the first attempt. Inside, they found a sealed envelope, a small antique-looking key, and a flash drive. The envelope contained a single page of Victoria's handwriting. "My darling children, if you found this second box, you've begun to understand what truly matters at Harrington Vineyard. The first box contained my hopes for what you might become. This one contains the truth about where we came from. The key opens a hidden compartment in my old desk in the library. The drive contains documents I've spent years collecting, the true history of our family and this land. Your father doesn't know about these materials. He believes our story began with his success, but our roots go much deeper. Understanding them may help you make sense of why this vineyard matters beyond its commercial value. Trust your instincts and each other. The truth can be painful, but ultimately liberating. With eternal love, Mom." The twins stared at the letter in stunned silence. Whatever Victoria had hidden, it was significant enough that she had kept it secret, even from Maxwell. "Her desk in the library," Charlotte said finally. "That antique secretary desk that Dad keeps exactly as she left it." Oliver nodded, carefully returning the letter to the envelope. "We should look at what's on the drive first. Before we use the key, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Back at their cottage, they connected the flash drive to Charlotte's laptop. It contained dozens of files, historical documents, old photographs, property records, and a document titled simply "The Truth, Docs." They opened it to find a detailed account written by Victoria several months before her death. In it, she explained that while researching the history of the vineyard property, she had discovered something shocking. The land had once belonged to a family named Aguilar, Mexican landowners who had established one of the first successful vineyards in the region in the 1880s. During Prohibition, when the vineyard was no longer profitable, the family had faced financial hardship. In 1924, a wealthy banker named Harrison Whitley had acquired the property through what Victoria's research revealed was a fraudulent transaction. The family had been tricked into signing over their land rights while believing they were securing a loan. The most shocking revelation came in the final paragraphs. Harrison Whitley was Maxwell Harrington's maternal grandfather. The Harrington fortune, which Maxwell believed had begun with his own tech innovations, had its foundations in his grandfather's various property schemes, including the theft of the Aguilar family vineyard. "Oh my God," Charlotte whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Dad has no idea. This explains why Mom was so insistent on preserving the original structures," Oliver said, connecting the pieces. "The well, the stone cottage, they were built by the Aguilar family. They spent hours poring over the additional files, which included genealogical records tracing the Aguilar family through the generations. Victoria had discovered that descendants of the original family still lived in the region, many working as vineyard laborers or in related agricultural jobs, unaware of their connection to the land they worked. Among the files was a folder labeled Maria Aguilar, containing photographs and documents related to an elderly woman. With a jolt, they recognized the name, Maria, the worker who had trained them during harvest, whose kindness had helped them survive those first brutal days. Maria is a descendant of the original owners, Charlotte realized aloud. That's why she told us her grandfather had a vineyard in Michoacan. Her family likely fled back to Mexico after losing everything here. Mom knew, Oliver said. She must have discovered the connection and sought out Maria specifically to work here. The final document on the drive was a letter from Victoria addressed to Maxwell, explaining everything she had discovered and laying out a plan for restitution. She had never delivered it, her illness progressing too rapidly after finalizing her research. She wanted Dad to establish a trust that would return partial ownership of the vineyard to the Aguilar descendants, Charlotte said, reading the draft proposal Victoria had prepared. Not to take away what he built, but to acknowledge the past and make some form of amends. As morning approached, the twins sat in silence, the weight of this hidden history settling over them. Their family wealth, the privilege they had taken for granted their entire lives, had roots in a historic injustice. More personally, the revelation cast their mother in yet another new light. Not just a brilliant scientist and visionary vintner, but a woman of profound moral courage who had been prepared to confront her husband with a difficult truth. "What do we do with this?" Oliver asked finally, gesturing toward the laptop. "Dad will be devastated." Charlotte thought for a moment. "We still have the key. Let's see what's in the desk before we decide anything." The main house was quiet. When they entered, the household staff busy with their morning routines. They made their way to the library, a magnificent room lined with bookshelves that Maxwell rarely used. In the corner stood Victoria's secretary desk, a beautiful antique, piece kept exactly as she had left it, like a shrine to her memory. The small key fit a nearly invisible keyhole behind one of the decorative moldings on the desk's interior. When turned, a hidden drawer sprang open, revealing a velvet pouch containing an antique ring with a distinctive design, a grapevine, wrapped around a band of gold, and another letter from Victoria. This ring belonged to Mariana Aguilar, the wife of the vineyard's founder, Victoria had written. "I purchased it from a pawn shop in San Francisco, where it had ended up after being sold by the family during their hardship. It is rightfully an Aguilar family heirloom. When the time is right, it should be returned to Maria or her descendants." The twins carefully returned everything to the hidden drawer, locking it and pocketing the key. They needed time to process what they had learned and decide how to proceed. That evening, instead of joining Maxwell for dinner, they asked to speak with Paolo privately. Without revealing the full extent of what they had discovered, they asked questions about Maria, her family, her history, her current situation. "Maria has been with us since the beginning," Paolo explained. "She lives with her daughter and grandchildren in a small house about 20 minutes from here. Her grandson Miguel Jr. shows great promise. Smart boy, interested in winemaking, but no money for proper education." He studied their faces curiously. Why this sudden interest in Maria's family? "Just trying to understand the people who've been part of this place longer than we have," Oliver replied carefully. Mom's journals mentioned Maria specifically. The next day, they requested to work alongside Maria again, this time in the sorting room, where harvested grapes received a final inspection before processing. As they worked, they asked subtle questions about her family history, listening intently as she shared fragments of stories passed down through generations. "My grandfather always said our family was meant to work with vines," Maria told them, her weathered hands deftly removing imperfect berries from the clusters. "He said it was in our blood to understand the relationship between the land, the weather, and the fruit." "Did he ever mention anything about a vineyard here, in this valley?" Charlotte asked carefully. A shadow passed over Maria's face. "Only that once, long ago, our family had land here that was taken from them. But that is an old story, not worth retelling. We are grateful for good work now." That night, the twins faced their most difficult decision yet. The harvest season that had begun as a punishment had evolved into something far more consequential than they could have imagined. "We have to tell Dad," Charlotte insisted, as they sat in their cottage, Victoria's letters and research spread before them. "He deserves to know what Mom discovered." "And what about Maria and her family?" Oliver countered. "They deserve to know too. Their heritage was stolen from them." "First Dad," Charlotte decided. "Then we figure out the right way to approach Maria. This has to be handled carefully." The next morning, they requested a formal meeting with Maxwell in his office, the most business-like setting they could choose for what would be a difficult conversation. He arrived looking curious, having noticed their increasingly serious demeanor over the past days. "This seems ominous," he remarked, taking his seat behind the desk. "Are you finally going to negotiate your release from vineyard servitude?" Instead of answering, Oliver placed the flash drive on the desk. "We found something else at the well, Dad. Something Mom left that you weren't meant to see unless certain conditions were met." Carefully, respectfully, they explained what Victoria had discovered about the vineyard's history and its connection to the Aguilar family. Maxwell listened without interruption, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something deeper and more painful as the truth settled in. When they finished, he sat in silence for several long moments, staring at the flash drive as if it might disappear if he looked away. "She never said a word about any of this," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "All those years she was researching, planning the vineyard, she never once mentioned finding anything unusual about the property's history." "We think she was still figuring out how to approach you with it when she got sick," Charlotte explained gently. "The letter she drafted for you was never finalized." Maxwell rubbed his hand across his face, suddenly looking older than his years. "So the vineyard that Victoria loved so much, that she poured her heart and knowledge into, it was built on stolen land that my own grandfather stole through fraud." He laughed bitterly. "And here I've been proud of being self-made, believing my fortune began with me." "Dad," Oliver said carefully, "Mom didn't discover this to punish you or make you feel guilty about something your grandfather did. She found it because she believed in knowing the truth and doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Maxwell nodded slowly, beginning to process the implications. "Maria Aguilar," he said, the name clearly new to his lips despite her years of employment. "I've seen her name on employee rolls for years, never once connected her to anything else." He looked up at his children with new awareness. "She trained you during harvest, didn't she? Paolo mentioned she'd taken a special interest in you both." "She was kind to us when she had no reason to be," Charlotte confirmed. "Taught us everything we needed to survive those first brutal days. All while working land that should have been her family's inheritance," Maxwell added, the irony clearly not lost on him. He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the vineyard stretching across the rolling hills. After a long moment, he turned back to face his children. "What do you think we should do?" The question surprised them. Throughout their lives, Maxwell Harrington had issued instructions, not requested opinions, especially not regarding business matters. "Mom had a plan," Oliver replied, opening the relevant document on his phone and handing it to his father. "She drafted this proposal for a trust that would return partial ownership of the vineyard to the Aguilar descendants while maintaining the business you've built." Maxwell read through Victoria's proposal carefully. "This is legally sound," he mused. "She must have consulted attorneys without my knowledge." He looked up at his children with newfound respect. "And what do you two think, beyond your mother's proposal?" The twins exchanged glances before Charlotte answered. "We think Mom was right about the importance of acknowledging the past without dismantling what's been built here. The vineyard as it exists now is successful because of your business acumen and Mom's vision. But it's also successful because it's built on land with a perfect terroir that the Aguilar family recognized and developed first." "There's no perfect solution," Oliver added. "We can't undo a century of history, but we can acknowledge the truth and find a way forward that honors all parts of the vineyard's story." Maxwell nodded slowly, a plan clearly forming in his mind. "I need time to think about this carefully. Legal implications, business considerations, personal elements. It's complex." He looked at his children with new eyes, not as the frivolous socialites they had been just weeks ago, but as thoughtful adults capable of wrestling with difficult moral questions. I'm curious what approach you would take if the decision were entirely yours. It was a test, but not the kind they were accustomed to from their father. Not a test of their obedience or conformity to his expectations, but a genuine question about their judgment and values. I would start by getting to know Maria and her family as people, not employees, Charlotte said after consideration. Understanding their current circumstances, their needs and aspirations. Mom's plan is a good framework, but it needs to be personalized based on what would actually benefit them most. And I would address the historical wrong without creating expectation of guilt or obligation, Oliver added. This isn't about charity or penance. It's about correcting an imbalance that's existed for generations. Maxwell studied them both, something like pride flickering in his expression. When did you two grow up? He asked softly, the question seemingly directed more to himself than to them. A few months ago, your biggest concern was which yacht to charter. We had good raw material, Charlotte replied with a small smile. We just needed the right conditions to develop properly, kind of like grapes. The vineyard analogy, so perfectly aligned with what they had been learning, broke the tension. Maxwell actually laughed, a sound they had rarely heard in recent years. Let me review everything carefully, he said, his decision-making tone returning. In the meantime, continue your work and your relationship with Maria, but don't reveal what we've learned yet. This needs to be handled delicately. As they left his office, Oliver and Charlotte felt a subtle shift in their relationship with their father. The forced labor that had begun as punishment had evolved into a partnership of sorts, still uneven in power, but with a new dimension of mutual respect. Over the next week, they divided their time between winemaking duties and subtle research into the Aguilar family. Without revealing their motives, they asked Paulo for opportunities to visit other parts of the operation, including the educational outreach program Victoria had established for employees' children. There they met Miguel Jr., Maria's 16-year-old grandson, who showed remarkable aptitude for both the science and artistry of winemaking. He reminds me of Mom, Charlotte remarked as they watched him meticulously testing soil samples during an after-school program. That same focused intensity she has in the journal photos. Aguilar blood, Oliver murmured. The connection to this land is literally in his DNA. They also spent time with Maria during lunch breaks, gradually earning her trust enough that she shared more detailed stories about her family's history. She spoke of her grandfather's bitterness over the lost vineyard, how he had returned to Mexico, but always talked of California as their true home. She described how subsequent generations had gradually returned to work the land as laborers, feeling a connection to it they couldn't quite explain. My father always said, our family, and this valley were meant for each other, Maria told them, her weathered hands cradling her coffee cup. He felt peace here that he found nowhere else. 10 days after their revelation to Maxwell, he called them to a meeting in the vineyard's main conference room. They arrived to find not just their father, but a team of lawyers and financial advisors, along with Paulo and Elena. I've made some decisions, Maxwell announced once everyone was seated. Based on Victoria's research and recommendations, as well as additional investigation my team has conducted to verify the historical claims. He outlined a comprehensive plan, the creation of the Aguilar Harrington Heritage Trust, which would receive a 30% ownership stake in the vineyard. The trust would benefit Maria's family directly, while also funding educational opportunities for other Hispanic vineyard workers and their children. A new historical center would be established to document the complete history of the vineyard, including the Aguilar family's founding role and the subsequent injustice. Most surprisingly, Maxwell announced the creation of a new wine label under the Harrington Vineyard umbrella, Aguilar Legacy. The premium line would be produced from the original vineyard blocks planted by the Aguilar family in the 1880s, with a significant portion of profits going directly to the trust. "There's one more thing," Maxwell said, turning to Oliver and Charlotte. "The trust needs directors who understand both the business and the history. I'm appointing you both, alongside Maria Aguilar, as the founding board. You'll need to continue your education in viticulture and business management, but you've proven yourselves capable of growth and serious thought." The twins exchanged shocked glances. This was far more than they had expected, not just acknowledgement of the historical wrong, but a complete integration of that acknowledgement into the vineyard's future operations, with them playing a central role. "When do we tell Maria?" Charlotte asked, overwhelmed by the responsibility they were being offered. "Tomorrow," Maxwell replied. "I'd like the three of us to speak with her together. This news will change her life, and we need to present it with the respect and sensitivity it deserves." That evening, as the twins walked among the vines in the fading autumn light, they reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with their father's desperate attempt to teach them responsibility. "Do you think Mom knew this would happen?" Oliver wondered, touching a vine tendril gently. "That forcing us to connect with the vineyard would lead to all of this?" Charlotte considered the question seriously. "I think she hoped we would eventually discover what she had hidden and have the moral courage to address it. But I doubt even she could have predicted exactly how it would unfold. 2 months ago, I wouldn't have cared about any of this," Oliver admitted. "Historic injustice, family legacy, agricultural heritage. It would have all seemed irrelevant to my life. And now it's everything," Charlotte finished for him. "Funny how quickly priorities can change when you're connected to something real." They reached the old well as darkness fell, its stone circle a shadow against the twilight sky. The place where it had all begun, both the Aguilar family's original vineyard venture and their own journey of discovery. "This isn't the end. You know," Oliver said, resting his hand on the ancient stones. "It's just the beginning of a much longer story." Charlotte nodded, understanding perfectly. The privileged, purposeless existence they had led before coming to the vineyard now seemed not just shallow, but incomprehensible. Ahead lay challenges they couldn't yet imagine, responsibilities they were still learning to shoulder, and relationships that would require careful nurturing. Yet for perhaps the first time in their lives, they felt equal to what awaited them, grounded in something more substantial than wealth or social position. The vineyard had given them more than calloused hands and an appreciation for honest labor. It had given them purpose, connection, and a chance to be part of something that would outlast them. As if, thinking the same thought, they both placed their hands on the well's edge, feeling the solid stone beneath their palms, the heart of the vineyard, where past and future met in the present moment, waiting for those who understood the value of roots. The meeting with Maria Aguilar took place in Maxwell's private study, a room the twins had rarely been permitted to enter while growing up. They watched nervously as Maria entered, her work clothes freshly changed but still bearing the subtle stains of vineyard labor, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern at being summoned by the owner himself. "Please sit down," Maxwell said, gesturing to the comfortable chair positioned directly across from his desk. The twins sat on a sofa nearby, trying to project reassurance despite their own anxiety about how this revelation would unfold. "Have I done something wrong, Mr. Harrington?" Maria asked directly, her dignity evident despite her apparent worry. Maxwell shook his head quickly. "Quite the opposite, Maria. You've been an exemplary employee for many years, but that's not why I asked you here today." He glanced at the twins, then back to Maria. "We've recently discovered something about the history of this land, and your family's connection to it." Over the next hour, Maxwell carefully explained what Victoria had uncovered, showing Maria the documents that proved her family's original ownership of the vineyard property. The twins watched as Maria's expression transformed from puzzlement to disbelief to a profound, quiet emotion that brought tears to her eyes. "My grandfather spoke of this place as our ancestral home," she said softly when Maxwell finished. "We thought he was just an old man with romantic ideas about the past. He died believing no one would ever know the truth." "My late wife knew," Maxwell replied gently, "and she wanted justice for your family. I'm ashamed it's taken this long to fulfill her wishes." He outlined the Aguilar Harrington Heritage Trust and the various provisions he had established, explaining how they would affect Maria and her descendants. When he finished, Maria sat in silence for several long moments, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why?" she finally asked, looking directly at Maxwell. "Why would you do this? Most wealthy men would bury such a discovery, not reshape their business around it." It was a penetrating question that cut to the heart of what had changed in the Harrington family. Maxwell considered his answer carefully. "2 months ago I might have done exactly that," he admitted. "But watching my children discover the truth about their mother's legacy and their own potential has shifted my perspective. Victoria believed in doing what's right, especially when it's difficult. It's time I honored that belief properly." Maria turned to look at the twins, studying them with new understanding. "So this is why you have been asking about my family, spending time with Miguel Jr. in the education program?" Charlotte nodded. "We wanted to understand your family better before everything changed, to see you as people, not just names in historical documents. Or objects of charity," Oliver added. "This isn't about making ourselves feel better by being generous. It's about acknowledging a historical wrong and creating a more truthful foundation for the future." Maria's gaze lingered on them both, seeing past their polished exteriors to the genuine transformation beneath. "You are not what I expected," she said simply. "When Paolo told me the owner's children would be working harvest, I thought you would quit within a day." "We almost did," Charlotte admitted with a rueful smile. "If not for your patience those first days, we probably would have." "The changes we're proposing will take time to implement fully," Maxwell explained, returning to the business aspects. "The legal structure of the trust, the rebranding of the original vineyard blocks, these require careful planning. But there are immediate steps we can take as well." He handed Maria an envelope containing a check, a substantial initial distribution representing back profit shares the Aguilar family would have earned had they maintained their ownership stake over the years. The amount was significant enough to be life-changing, but calculated with care to represent fair compensation rather than charity. "This belongs to your family," Maxwell said simply. "No strings attached, regardless of whether you choose to participate in the trust and other arrangements we've proposed." Maria stared at the check, her hands trembling slightly. "I never expected to see justice in my lifetime," she said softly. "My grandfather died believing our connection to this land was broken forever." "Not broken," Charlotte said gently, "just hidden beneath the surface like the vines in winter. The roots were always there, waiting." The vineyard metaphor seemed to resonate with Maria. She nodded slowly, then looked up with newfound composure. "I will need time to discuss this with my family. This affects them all, especially the younger generation." "Of course," Maxwell agreed. "The formal documents will be ready for review next week. In the meantime, is there anything else you'd like to ask or discuss?" Maria considered for a moment. "Yes, I would like to show my grandson Miguel the original vineyard blocks, to explain our family's connection to them properly. Would that be permitted?" "It's your heritage," Maxwell replied. "You don't need permission." As they walked Maria back to her car, the twins sensed a subtle shift in how she carried herself, a new certainty in her posture that reflected the restoration of something long lost. Before leaving, she turned to them both. "Your mother would be proud," she said simply, "not just of what you discovered, but of who you've become in the process." The words, coming from someone who had known Victoria's true passion for the vineyard, meant more than any praise they had ever received. For their academic achievements or social standing, in the weeks that followed, a new rhythm developed at Harrington Vineyard. The formal winemaking internship that the twins had requested evolved into a comprehensive education program, with Maxwell arranging for experts to teach them every aspect of the business, from viticulture and enology to marketing, distribution, and financial management. Maria agreed to serve as a founding trustee of the Aguilar Harrington Heritage Trust, bringing her grandson Miguel into the discussions as well. The boy's natural aptitude for vineyard management confirmed what the twins had observed. The connection to the land ran in his blood. Maxwell arranged for him to begin formal viticulture studies through a special program at UC Davis, with a position waiting for him at the vineyard after graduation. The announcement of the new Aguilar Legacy wine label created industry buzz, with prestigious wine publications requesting interviews about the historical discovery and the vineyard's unusual response. Maxwell, typically reluctant to engage with press, surprised everyone by suggesting the twins handle these interviews alongside Maria. "This story belongs to all of you," he explained, "and frankly, you understand its heart better than I do." En date, their first major interview was with Wine Spectator, whose senior editor arrived expecting a superficial corporate social responsibility initiative. Instead, she found something far more genuine, a family reckoning with its past and reimagining its future in partnership with those who had been wronged. "This isn't just about acknowledging a historical injustice," Charlotte explained as they walked the original vineyard blocks, now designated for the Aguilar Legacy label. "It's about recognizing that the success of this vineyard comes from the land itself and the people who understood it first. The Aguilar family recognized something special about this terroir over a century ago," Oliver added. "Their insight is as much a part of what makes our wines exceptional as anything we've contributed since." The editor was particularly struck by the easy rapport between the Harrington twins and Miguel Jr., who joined them for part of the tour. Where she had expected awkward charity, she found genuine collegiality and shared passion for the vineyard's potential. The article, when published, highlighted not just the unusual restoration of partial ownership to the Aguilar family, but the transformation of the Harrington twins from notorious socialites to serious vintners with a deep appreciation for their vineyard's complex heritage. The accompanying photographs, Oliver kneeling to examine soil samples with Miguel Jr., Charlotte in earnest conversation with Maria about pruning techniques, both twins with dirt-stained hands and focused expressions, told a story of authentic change that no PR firm could have manufactured. The piece concluded with a quote from Maria that captured the essence of what had occurred. "This land has always known who it belonged to. Now we all understand its truth as well." As December approached, marking nearly 4 months since the twins had arrived for their punishment, Maxwell called a family meeting to discuss the future. They gathered not in his formal office but in the vineyard's small tasting room, surrounded by bottles representing vintages throughout Harrington's history. "Your agreement was for 8 weeks of harvest work," Maxwell began, pouring each of them a glass of the vineyard's reserve Cabernet. "That period ended nearly 2 months ago. You've more than fulfilled your obligation, and your trust funds and credit cards have been reinstated as promised." The twins exchanged glances, realizing they had barely thought about their frozen assets or restricted privileges in recent weeks. The cottage, that had initially seemed like prison quarters, had become a home of sorts, its simplicity now feeling comfortable rather than punitive. "What are your plans?" Maxwell asked directly. "Your lives in San Francisco are waiting if you want to return to them. Your penthouse apartments, your social obligations, your university enrollment." He kept his tone neutral, giving no indication of his preference. Oliver swirled the wine in his glass, considering the question seriously. "I've been thinking about that," he said slowly. "I'd like to transfer to UC Davis for their viticulture and enology program. Elena thinks I have a good palate, and the chemistry aspects fascinate me. And I've been talking with the marketing team about developing a comprehensive rebrand around the vineyard's complete history," Charlotte added. "I'd like to continue that work while taking some business courses, maybe online at first, then we'll see." Maxwell studied them both, searching for any sign that this was merely an attempt to please him, rather than a genuine shift in their interests. "You understand that neither of you needs to work here or anywhere to maintain your lifestyle. Your trust funds are substantial." "It's not about need," Oliver replied, meeting his father's gaze directly. "For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely interested in something beyond myself. I want to understand how all of this works, to be part of creating something real. Besides," Charlotte added with a small smile, "our social media followers are actually more interested in our vineyard transformation than they ever were in our parties and shopping sprees. My post about the history of the Aguilar family got more engagement than anything I've ever shared." Maxwell nodded, understanding that for his children, raised in a world where attention was currency, this shift in public perception mattered. What had begun as a punishment forcing them to experience real work had evolved into something unexpected, a genuine passion for the vineyard's legacy and potential. "If you're serious about this," he said finally, "I'll have the renovations on the east wing completed. You can maintain permanent residences here while also keeping your San Francisco properties." He raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings. Day." As they clinked glasses, a comfortable silence fell between them, a rarity in the typically tense Harrington family dynamics. For perhaps the first time since Victoria's death, they felt like a family united by something more meaningful than obligation or shared DNA. The next day, the twins decided to revisit the old well where their journey of discovery had begun. The winter air was crisp, the dormant vines stretching across the hillsides like intricate sculpture. They stood beside the stone structure, now adorned with a small plaque commemorating the Aguilar family's founding role in the vineyard's history. "Could you have imagined any of this 4 months ago?" Charlotte asked, gesturing toward the vineyard spread below them. "That we'd actually choose to stay here, work here?" Oliver shook his head, still somewhat amazed by their transformation. "I couldn't have imagined caring this much about anything, honestly. My biggest concern was which exclusive club was opening that weekend." "Do you miss it?" Charlotte asked, quietly. "The parties, the constant travel, the freedom from responsibility." Oliver considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Knowing exactly what was expected, just show up, look good, spend money. This is harder in a lot of ways. There's no clear roadmap for what we're trying to do here." "But better," Charlotte suggested. "Infinitely better," Oliver agreed. "I actually sleep at night now. Not just pass out from exhaustion or substances, but really sleep. My brain isn't constantly scrambling for the next distraction." They continued walking among the dormant vines, their boots crunching on the frosted ground. Despite the winter barrenness, there was beauty in the landscape, the twisted architecture of the bare vines, the mist hovering in the valleys between rows, the promise of renewal come spring. "Dad seems different too," Charlotte observed, "more present, almost peaceful somehow." "I think he's reconnecting with Mom through all of this," Oliver suggested, "fulfilling her vision for this place in a way he couldn't bring himself to do before, and maybe seeing parts of her in us for the first time." The thought lingered between them as they completed their walk, both reflecting on how their mother's hidden legacy had reshaped not just their understanding of the vineyard, but their relationship with their father and their own identities. That evening, they joined Maxwell for dinner at the main house, no longer a formal summons, but a family routine they had established over recent weeks. As they discussed the day's developments, Maxwell surprised them with news. The board approved the establishment of the Victoria Harrington Sustainable Viticulture Research Centre, he announced. It will be housed in new facilities we're building on the property, dedicated to continuing your mother's work on environmentally responsible growing practices. The twins exchanged excited glances, immediately grasping the significance of this development. "That's perfect," Charlotte exclaimed. "Mum's scientific legacy alongside her ethical one." "Will it be open to outside researchers?" Oliver asked, already thinking of the possibilities. "Partnerships with universities, that sort of thing?" Maxwell nodded, pleased by their immediate engagement. "Yes, that's the plan. Maria's granddaughter Teresa, the one studying environmental science, has already expressed interest in being involved once she completes her degree. The Aguilars and Harringtons building something together," Charlotte mused. "Mum would have loved that symmetry." Later that night, as they walked back to their cottage under a canopy of stars, the twins found themselves discussing not the past but the future. Their ideas for the research center, the first vintage of the Aguilar legacy wine, Miguel Jr. education, and their own studies. Their conversation flowed with an energy and focus that would have been unimaginable months earlier, when their discussions rarely ventured beyond celebrity gossip and luxury purchases. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Oliver said as they reached their cottage. "That first day of harvest, when we were so sore and exhausted we could barely move, and Maria told us, 'First day always the hardest. Body learns, gets stronger.' Does. She wasn't just talking about physical labor," Charlotte realized. "Exactly. Everything worthwhile has a painful beginning. You have to push through that initial resistance to discover what you're capable of becoming." As December unfolded, preparations began for the first official meeting of the Aguilar Harrington Heritage Trust. Maxwell had arranged for the gathering to take place just before Christmas, when Maria's extended family could attend. The event would formally establish the Trust's governance structure and introduce the various educational and historical preservation initiatives that would fall under its umbrella. The twins threw themselves into the preparations with characteristic intensity, but now directed toward meaningful outcomes rather than superficial display. Charlotte worked with local historians to create exhibits documenting the vineyard's complete history, while Oliver collaborated with Elena on a special blending session that would create a commemorative wine for the occasion. 3 days before the event, an unexpected winter storm hit the Sonoma Valley, bringing heavier rainfall than the region had seen in decades. The twins awoke to emergency alerts on their phones and the sound of Paolo's truck arriving at their cottage. "The creek boundaries have overflowed," he explained urgently. "The lower vineyard blocks are at risk of flooding. We need all hands to help with emergency drainage." Without hesitation, they pulled on work clothes and boots, rushing out into the pre-dawn darkness and driving rain. At the lower vineyard, ironically the original Aguilar blocks, now designated for the legacy label, dozens of workers were already creating drainage channels to divert water away from the precious vines. Maxwell arrived shortly after, not to observe, but to work alongside everyone else. In driving rain and ankle-deep mud, the billionaire tech mogul dug trenches with the same urgency as the seasonal workers, his expensive rain gear becoming as soiled as everyone else's attire. The twins found themselves working alongside Maria's family members, who had come to protect the land that had once been theirs, and was now, in some measure, returning to their stewardship. Miguel Jr. worked with particular determination, his understanding of water flow patterns proving invaluable in designing effective drainage routes. For hours they labored, taking brief breaks only when absolutely necessary, their bodies remembering the discipline of harvest season. As morning progressed into afternoon, the rain gradually subsided, leaving them muddy, exhausted, but successful. The vineyard blocks had been saved from potentially devastating erosion and root damage. As workers began departing, Maxwell gathered the core team, Paolo, Elena, the twins, and Maria's family, in the winery building for hot coffee and a chance to recover from their efforts. "I've seen natural disasters destroy generational vineyards. In ours," Paolo said soberly, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "What you all did today saved not just the vines, but the literal foundation of this place." "It was worth every blister," Charlotte said, examining her hands with a mixture of pain and pride. The calluses from harvest had softened during her weeks of less physical work, and new blisters had formed underneath them. "The vines will be stronger for having survived this challenge," Maria observed, her practical wisdom as always cutting to the heart of the matter. Like people, they develop character through adversity. Oliver, watching the easy camaraderie between the Harrington and Aguilar families, united by shared purpose in a crisis, felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what his mother had understood and tried to preserve in her final acts. The understanding that meaningful connection comes through shared purpose and mutual respect, not through transaction or obligation. "We should document today," he suggested, seeing an opportunity to honor the moment. "Include it in the historical exhibits for the trust ceremony. This is part of the vineyard story too, how we all came together to protect it." Maxwell nodded in agreement, his expression softer than the twins had seen in years. "Victoria would have been right beside us today," he said quietly. "She believed a vineyard wasn't just about the wine it produced, but about the community it created." The storm crisis had an unexpected effect on the upcoming trust ceremony, transforming it from what might have been a somewhat formal event into a genuine celebration of two families united by land, history, and now shared purpose. The weather cleared, leaving the valley washed clean and sparkling, the dormant vines standing resilient against the winter landscape. On the day of the ceremony, the winery's great hall was filled to capacity with Aguilar family members, vineyard workers, local historians, and industry representatives. The exhibits Charlotte had curated told the complete story of the land, from the original Aguilar vineyard through the painful dispossession to Victoria's discovery and the eventual reconciliation. Maxwell began the proceedings with uncharacteristic humility, acknowledging the historical wrong and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to be part of its correction. He spoke of Victoria's vision and how her posthumous guidance had transformed not just the vineyard's future, but his own understanding of legacy. "True wealth," he said in conclusion, "isn't measured in assets or acquisitions, but in relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. The partnership we're formalizing today represents the most valuable investment I've ever made, one in human dignity and historical truth." The twins watched their father with new eyes, seeing not the driven, emotionally distant businessman who had raised them, but a man capable of growth and genuine connection. His journey paralleled their own, from superficial values based on wealth and status to a deeper understanding of what creates meaning and purpose. When it came time for the formal signing of the trust documents, Maria stepped forward to represent the Aguilar family. As she picked up the pen, she paused and beckoned to Miguel Jr. "My grandson will be the one to steward this land into its next chapter," she explained. "He should sign alongside me." The young man approached, visibly moved by the significance of the moment. As he signed his name below his grandmother's, Oliver leaned toward Charlotte and whispered, "Full circle." She nodded, understanding perfectly. The land that had been taken from the Aguilar family nearly a century ago was now formally reconnected to their legacy, with a new generation poised to help guide its future. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated with the first bottles of the commemorative blend, Maxwell found a moment alone with his children in a quiet corner of the hall. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone unusually reflective, "about what happens next with Harrington Enterprises. For years I assumed you'd both eventually take executive positions, whether you were interested or not. It was expected, part of the dynasty-building mindset I've operated under." The twins exchanged glances, sensing the direction of his thoughts. "But I've seen what happens when people find their true calling, rather than following a predetermined path," Maxwell continued. "The passion, the commitment, the fulfillment, it's a different quality of engagement entirely." "Are you saying you don't want us involved in the company?" Oliver asked, curious rather than defensive. Maxwell shook his head. "I'm saying I want you to choose your paths based on genuine interest and aptitude, not obligation. If that includes roles in the tech enterprise, wonderful. If it leads you deeper into the vineyard's operations, equally wonderful. Perhaps something else entirely." He looked around at the gathering, the blended families, the vineyard workers, the community that had formed around this place. Victoria understood something I'm only beginning to grasp, that a meaningful legacy isn't about controlling the future, but about creating a foundation strong enough to support whatever grows from it. As the evening continued, the twins circulated. Among the guests, no longer the entitled socialites who had arrived at the vineyard 4 months earlier, but young adults with purpose and genuine connection to the community around them. They listened more than they spoke, asked questions rather than seeking attention, and demonstrated a humility that would have been unimaginable in their former lives. Near the end of the celebration, they found themselves back at the old well, having walked there with Maria and Miguel Jr. to enjoy a moment of quiet reflection away from the festivities. The stone structure stood as it had for over a century, witness to the full cycle of the land story. "My grandfather used to say that wells are magical places," Maria told them, her hand resting gently on the ancient stones. "They connect the surface world to the hidden waters beneath, just as they connect the present to the past. And sometimes they reveal secrets at exactly the right moment," Charlotte added, thinking of Victoria's hidden boxes and the truths they had contained. Miguel Jr. studied the well with the focused curiosity that reminded the twins so much of their mother's journal entries. "I've been researching heritage preservation techniques," he said. "Ways to maintain historical structures while adapting them for modern use. I think we could restore this well as a working fountain for the historical center, preserving its original stonework while giving it new purpose." Oliver smiled, recognizing in the young man's vision the perfect metaphor for what had occurred at Harrington Vineyard, not erasing the past, but incorporating it honestly into a revitalized future. As they stood together in the fading winter light, the distant sounds of celebration drifting up from the winery, Charlotte felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the material privileges that had defined her former life. Here, among these people, engaged in work that held meaning beyond personal gratification, she had found something she hadn't known she was missing, a sense of genuine belonging and purpose. "You know," Oliver said, voicing thoughts similar to her own, "when Dad sent us here as punishment, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to us." "And now?" Miguel Jr. asked, curious about their transformation. Oliver gazed out. Over the vineyard, the dormant vines silhouetted against the sunset sky, holding within their seemingly lifeless branches the promise of another season of growth and fruitfulness. "Now I understand what Mom wrote in her letter to us," he replied. "The most worthwhile endeavors unfold slowly, over years of devoted attention." She wasn't just talking about winemaking. She was talking about building a life with meaning. Maria nodded, her weathered face reflecting the wisdom of someone who had always understood this truth. The land teaches patience to those willing to learn. Not everything valuable can be acquired quickly or easily. As darkness fell, they walked back toward the lights of the winery. 4 people connected not by accident, but by the complex interweaving of choice, circumstance, and courage. Across generations. Behind them, the old well stood sentinel over the vineyard, its secrets now shared, its purpose fulfilled in ways its original builders could never have imagined. And in that moment, it was easy to believe that somewhere, Victoria Harrington was watching with approval as her final, most important harvest came to fruition, not of grapes, but of understanding, reconciliation, and renewed purpose that would sustain both families for generations to come. 5 years had passed since the storm that had threatened the Aguilar Vineyard blocks. 5 years since the formal establishment of the Aguilar Harrington Heritage Trust. What had begun as Maxwell Harrington's desperate attempt to teach his entitled children responsibility had evolved into a transformation none of them could have predicted, rippling outward to affect not just the Harrington family, but an entire community. On a perfect June morning, Oliver Harrington stood at the edge of the Eastern Vineyard block, clipboard in hand, supervising the installation of a revolutionary drip irrigation system he had helped design as part of his master's thesis at UC Davis. At 23, he had grown into a confident young man whose knowledge of viticulture was now sought by vineyard managers throughout the region. The designer clothes and carefully cultivated socialite image had been replaced by practical work attire and a deeply earned expertise that commanded genuine respect. The flow sensors need to be adjusted on rows 15 through 18, he instructed the installation team, examining the soil moisture readings on his tablet. We're getting uneven distribution in the clay transition zones. He glanced up as a familiar pickup truck approached along the access road, driven by Miguel Aguilar Jr., who had graduated with honors from his viticulture program the previous year and now served as assistant vineyard manager. The 2 young men, once separated by vast social and economic divides, had developed a friendship founded on shared passion and complementary skills. Oliver's scientific approach balancing perfectly with Miguel's intuitive understanding of the vines and terrain. "Board members arriving for the meeting," Miguel called out as he parked. "Charlotte's looking for you." Oliver checked his watch and nodded. "I'll head up now. Can you oversee the sensor adjustments?" Miguel grinned as he took the clipboard. "Go put on your fancy meeting clothes, Professor. I've got this." The friendly teasing reflected the easy rapport that had developed between the families over the years, the initial awkwardness of their reconciliation giving way to genuine partnership. Oliver smiled as he headed toward his truck, taking a moment to appreciate the vibrant green vineyard stretching across the rolling hills. The vines were thriving, the implementation of his irrigation innovations already showing results in more consistent growth patterns across variable soil conditions. At the main house, Oliver found the atmosphere buzzing with activity. Today marked a significant milestone, the official launch of the Victoria Harrington Research Center for Sustainable Viticulture, a state-of-the-art facility built on the property to continue his mother's vision of environmentally responsible winemaking practices. In the grand entry hall, Charlotte was orchestrating final preparations with characteristic efficiency, her natural leadership abilities now channeled into meaningful purpose rather than social manipulation. She had completed her business degree, while simultaneously managing the rebranding of Harrington Vineyard, transforming its marketing approach to embrace its complex history rather than obscuring it. "There you are," she called, spotting Oliver as he entered. "Dad's plane just landed. He'll be here within the hour. The governor's office confirmed attendance, and the press packets are ready for distribution." Oliver nodded, taking in his sister's transformation. Charlotte, at 23, possessed the same beauty and charisma that had once made her a fixture in society pages, but it was now anchored by substance and purpose. Her understanding of the wine business, particularly its marketing and community engagement aspects, had earned her recognition far beyond what her famous surname could have provided. "How's the demonstration vineyard looking?" she asked, checking items off her tablet list while simultaneously directing caterers. "Perfect timing on the installation. We'll be able to show the real-time monitoring system during the center tour," Oliver replied, heading toward the stairs. "I'll change and meet you in the conference room for final briefing." As he passed the library, Oliver paused, drawn by a familiar voice. Maria Aguilar sat in conversation with a reporter from Wine Enthusiast, her dignified presence commanding the room despite her simple attire. At 72, she remained a vital force in the vineyard's operations, her role as a founding trustee establishing her as the living connection between the land's past and its future. "The true revolution," she was explaining to the attentive journalist, "isn't in the technology itself, impressive as it is. It's in the philosophy behind it, the understanding that we are stewards, not owners, of this land." When Victoria Harrington began researching sustainable practices 30 years ago, few took such approaches seriously. Now they're becoming industry standard. The reporter nodded, clearly captivated by Maria's perspective. "And your family's historical connection to the property adds another dimension to that stewardship concept." Maria smiled, her eyes catching Oliver's in the doorway. "Indeed, the Aguilar family's roots in this soil go back generations. Now my grandson works alongside Oliver Harrington to advance the same vision of responsible cultivation that his ancestor pioneered in the 1880s. There's a symmetry there that feels like justice." Oliver slipped away, moved as always by Maria's ability to articulate the deeper significance of what they had built together. In his room, he changed quickly into the business attire reserved for formal occasions, reflecting on how different his life had become from the path he had once seemed destined to follow. The memories of his former existence, the hollow pursuit of pleasure, the constant need for distraction, the emptiness beneath the carefully crafted image, now seemed like another lifetime. The work that filled his days provided challenges that engaged his intellect and creativity in ways no exclusive club or luxury experience ever had. The relationships he had formed with the vineyard community offered connection and purpose that his socialite friends could never understand. Downstairs, he joined Charlotte in the conference room, where the leadership team had gathered for final preparations. Elena Vasquez, now in her 50s and internationally recognized for her winemaking expertise, was reviewing the tasting selections for the reception. Paolo, his hair now more gray than black, discussed logistics with Teresa Aguilar, Maria's granddaughter, who had completed her environmental science degree and now directed the vineyard's sustainability initiatives. "Final agenda review," Charlotte announced, bringing the room to attention. "The governor arrives at 11:30, followed by the university representatives and industry partners. Dad's handling the initial welcome and context. Then Oliver presents the research center's technical capabilities. Maria speaks about the historical significance, followed by Miguel and Teresa on current initiatives. Questions. The team's focus and professionalism reflected how far they had all come together. What had begun as a reluctant punishment for two spoiled heirs had evolved into a model of innovative business practices, environmental stewardship, and historical reconciliation that was drawing attention throughout the industry. Shortly before the ceremony began, Maxwell Harrington arrived, his private helicopter landing on the pad constructed at the eastern edge of the property. At 63, he retained the commanding presence that had built his tech empire, but the hard-driving ruthlessness that had once defined him had mellowed into a more thoughtful leadership style. "Everything on schedule?" he asked as the twins greeted him on the helipad. "Perfect timing," Charlotte confirmed. "The installation team just completed the demonstration vineyard sensors, and the governor's motorcade is 10 minutes out." Maxwell nodded, then paused, taking a moment to really see his children. "You two have exceeded every expectation," he said, unexpected emotion coloring his voice. "Victoria would be so proud of what you've built here." The twins exchanged glances, touched by their father's rare display of sentiment. "We had good foundation to build on," Oliver replied. "Mom's vision, your business acumen, the Aguilar's connection to the land. We're just the bridge between all those elements." As they walked together toward the newly constructed research center, Maxwell reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. "You know, when I sent you here 5 years ago, I was desperate. I thought you were both heading for disaster, and I had no idea how to reach you. The vineyard was my last resort, not a carefully considered plan." "Best mistake you ever made," Charlotte said with a smile, linking her arm through his. "Not a mistake," Maxwell corrected. "A moment of clarity. I finally understood what Victoria had been trying to tell me for years, that true wealth has nothing to do with monetary value and everything to do with connection to something meaningful." The research center building came into view as they rounded the curve in the path, a stunning blend of modern architecture and traditional vineyard elements, its living roof planted with native species, its walls incorporating stone from the property itself. Solar arrays and rainwater collection systems demonstrated the facility's commitment to sustainability, while the expansive research vineyards surrounding it showcased various experimental growing techniques. "The heart of the vineyard," Oliver said softly, echoing the phrase from Victoria's journal that had come to symbolize so much about their journey. The dedication ceremony unfolded with precision, the governor and university representatives offering remarks about the importance of sustainable agricultural research in an era of climate uncertainty. Industry partners spoke of the center's potential impact on winemaking practices throughout the region and beyond. When it came time for the Harrington family's formal presentation, Maxwell stepped to the podium first, his usual commanding presence, tempered by genuine humility. "Many of you know the official history of Harrington Vineyard," he began, "the successful tech entrepreneur who purchased prime Sonoma land to create an award-winning winery. But that narrative, like many simplified success stories, obscured a more complex truth, one that my late wife Victoria discovered and my children had the courage to bring to light." He proceeded to share the complete history of the property, including the Aguilar family's founding role and the subsequent injustice of their dispossession. There was no defensiveness in his account, no attempt to minimize his own family's complicity in benefiting from that historical wrong. Instead, he spoke with clarity and conviction about the importance of acknowledging difficult truths as the foundation for genuine progress. "The greatest achievement isn't the research center or even the trust," Maria said thoughtfully. "It's the transformation of your children. They have found their purpose." Maxwell nodded, unable to disagree. For all his business accomplishments, watching his children discover meaningful work and authentic relationships represented his most profound success, one that could never be measured in market valuations or acquisition deals. As the celebration continued under the stars, the twins eventually found a quiet moment together near the old well that had started their journey of discovery 5 years earlier. "Remember that first day of harvest?" Charlotte asked, leaning against the ancient stones, "when we thought we might actually die from exhaustion and blisters?" Oliver laughed. "I've never been so physically miserable in my life, or so outraged at being forced to do manual labor." And now look at us. Charlotte gestured toward their surroundings. The research center illuminated in the distance, the historical exhibits documenting the vineyard's complete story, the thriving vines stretching across the moonlit landscape. Who would have thought physical labor would be our salvation? Not just the labor, Oliver reflected, but connecting to something real, Mom's legacy, the land's history, actual challenges that matter more than social media metrics or exclusive club memberships. They fell silent, contemplating how completely their values and ambitions had transformed. Their former friends from the socialite circuit had largely drifted away, unable to relate to the twins' new priorities and commitments. In their place had come relationships founded on shared purpose and genuine respect, with the Aguilar family, with vineyard workers and researchers, with industry partners committed to sustainable practices. "Do you ever miss it?" Oliver asked. Suddenly, the freedom, the parties, the constant travel and excitement. Charlotte considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," she admitted. Life had clear metrics, be seen at the right places, wear the right labels, maintain the right image. What we're doing now is infinitely more complex. There's no instruction manual for reconciling historical injustices or building truly sustainable businesses. "But better," Oliver suggested. "Immeasurably better," Charlotte agreed. "I sleep well now. Not just physically tired, but morally at peace. I know what I'm building has meaning beyond my own gratification." As midnight approached, the celebration began winding down. Guests departed, thanking the Harrington and Aguilar families for not just a memorable event, but an inspiring model of how historical acknowledgement could lead to innovation and renewal, rather than recrimination. The research center stood illuminated against the night sky, its modern lines harmonizing with the traditional vineyard architecture surrounding it. Inside, laboratories waited to advance the sustainable growing practices Victoria had championed decades earlier. Outside, the demonstration vineyards showcased experimental techniques that honored traditional knowledge while embracing cutting-edge technology. In the quiet aftermath, as staff completed the final cleanup, Maxwell found his children standing, together near the old well, deep in conversation. He approached slowly, struck by the poised, purposeful adults they had become, so different from the entitled, directionless teenagers who had arrived at the vineyard 5 years earlier. "It's been quite a day," he said, joining them in the moonlight. "Your mother would be proud." "Of all of us," Charlotte replied, including her father in the assessment. "You had the courage to face a difficult truth and change course accordingly. That's rare, especially for someone as successful as you've been." Maxwell acknowledged the observation with a nod. "Success is a dangerous thing," he said thoughtfully. "It convinces you that your way of seeing the world is correct, that your values are universal. I was fortunate to have Victoria's perspective, preserved in those time capsules, and children brave enough to insist I pay attention to what she discovered." Oliver gestured toward the research center, gleaming in the distance. "We've created something remarkable here. Not just the facility itself, but the model it represents. The integration of historical acknowledgement, environmental stewardship, and community partnership offers a template others can adapt." "Which is exactly what Victoria hoped for," Maxwell agreed. She understood that individual action, while important, can never be sufficient. True change requires creating systems and institutional approaches that others can replicate and improve upon. As they stood together in the moonlight, 3 individuals transformed by their connection to this land and its complex history, each felt a profound sense of having found their proper place and purpose, not through pursuit of status or accumulation of wealth, but through the harder, more rewarding work of building something meaningful in partnership with others. The old well stood sentinel beside them, its stones containing the memories of generations who had tended these vines, from the original Aguilar pioneers through Victoria's scientific innovations to the present collaborative endeavor. What had begun as a punishment had evolved into purpose. What had been hidden had emerged into light. What had been broken had found restoration, not through erasure of the past, but through honest reckoning with its complexities. In the distance, the vines stretched across the moonlit landscape, their orderly rows representing centuries of human cultivation in partnership with natural systems. Like the generations who tended them, they endured through seasons of abundance and scarcity, constantly adapting while remaining rooted in the specific character of this place. "We should get some rest," Charlotte finally said, practical as always despite the moment's emotional resonance. The research team arrives early tomorrow to begin the soil microbiome study. As they walked together toward the main house, Maxwell reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. The twins, who had once seemed lost to shallow pursuits, had discovered depths of character and purpose he could never have engineered through conventional parenting. The vineyard that had been Victoria's passion project had become the vehicle for their transformation and his own evolution as well. "Sometimes," he observed quietly, "our greatest achievements are the ones we never planned, the outcomes that emerge when we remain open to unexpected possibilities and uncomfortable truths." Oliver and Charlotte nodded in agreement, understanding that this insight applied not just to their father's business philosophy, but to their own life paths as well. The future stretching before them contained challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but they faced them now with resources more valuable than the wealth they had inherited, with purpose, perspective, and partnerships founded on genuine respect. As they reached the main house, they paused for one last look at the moonlit landscape, the research center, the historical well, the vineyards stretching to the horizon. What had once been merely a property had become the heart of a mission that would outlast them all, connecting past and future generations through shared stewardship of the land. "Not a bad outcome," Charlotte observed, "for two spoiled brats forced to pick grapes as punishment." "Not bad at all," Oliver agreed with a smile, "for a vineyard whose deepest secret waited in an old well to be discovered by someone who understood the value of roots." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.